Before we dive in, if you're liking the show, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button to follow the show wherever you're watching or listening.
And while you're at it, drop a like and let us know what you think in the comments. It actually helps more than you think.
All right, let's get to it. They've been talking very openly about how they want to be financially frugal and efficient. You know, if they don't have money for Stephen Colbert, right? Stephen Colbert gets cut, but then they go spend an absurd amount of money on this conservative opinion site that's housed on Substack. How do you square those two? I mean, it just seems like everything David Ellison and his lieutenants have been saying is contradicted by one of the first major moves that they're making.
Welcome to Power Lines presented by Beehive. I'm John Passantino.
And I'm Oliver Darcy.
Today we're discussing the media's blackout on Donald Trump's visible health problems, cable kingpin John Malone criticizing CNN as anti-Trump. But first, David Ellison, the new owner of Paramount, is on the brink of a deal to purchase Bari Weiss's The Free Press. Oliver, it's been another crazy week in media. This week really culminating in some big news yesterday on Wednesday. That is that Paramount boss David Ellison, who has really put together some significant news in recent weeks since taking over Paramount, signing this huge deal to bring UFC to Paramount's platforms, the $1.5 billion deal with South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone to keep them on Comedy Central and Paramount Plus. And now we're hearing that this deal to acquire Bari Weiss's The Free Press, this is the conservative, right-leaning website that is mostly an opinion site. But apparently Ellison is very taken with Bari and this site and is reportedly nearing a deal to purchase it for north of $100 million, which I think is a pretty astounding number by any stretch, considering what it is that you can read and consume on this site and its current financials. Oliver, you've done some new reporting on this and hearing that it is indeed very close to being done. What are you hearing about it?
Well, a few things, John. One, I think most obviously is that if you're inside CBS News, you're probably, the place has already been teetering, given all the turbulence it's undergone over the last year or so with 60 Minutes and with the Trump settlement and with the loss of their news chief, Wendy McMahon, with Bill Owens from 60 Minutes resigning. I mean, this place has really been in a hurricane. And now I think the people over at CBS are realizing this is not going to end with the acquisition by Skydance. It's actually just beginning. And they're going to have to take editorial cues from Bari Weiss, who, for people who don't know, is, she's a very difficult figure to classify. I think the best way to describe her is maybe like the things she stands against. Anti-DEI, for instance. She's anti-woke. I don't know if that's like a great way to describe her. She is very, pro-Israel, but she doesn't fall neatly into a camp. You can't say she's part of the MAGA crowd. She's not really, even though they tend to like her. She's certainly not someone who's on the left. She is a difficult person to classify, but she says things, I think, and she publishes things that make the wealthy class feel, I think, comfortable and aligns with their viewpoints. And I think she's enamored a lot of media executives and media owners. And so now David Ellison, one of those media executives and media owners and billionaires, is nearing a deal to purchase the Free Press for an absurd amount of money and install Bari Weiss into a very senior position over at CBS News. And I think there's a lot of things to unpack here, but the big takeaway is that David Ellison is going to disrupt CBS News. Like, this is not going to be the CBS News that everyone has known for decades. This is not Dan Rather's CBS News. This is going to be something completely different.
Yeah, it certainly will be. The sort of irony here is that Ellison, when this deal came together and Ellison came out and held these press conferences to speak with reporters, you were in the room in New York. He did it again in Los Angeles subsequently, came out and said that, look, he's not going to politicize this company in any way. I think that for most people, that sounds great. Like, why would we want an entertainment company to be politicized, especially under this administration? They're going to try to maintain an independent streak. They're going to do what's best for their business, what's best for their audience. And Paramount is a giant company, right? I mean, it's still small by big tech standards these days, but it's a big company. It's got a big film studio, and of course, it has the cable platforms like Comedy Central and MTV. But then there's this news division with CBS News, which is, the home of 60 Minutes and the CBS Evening News. And a lot of people still get their information from there. 60 Minutes is, I believe, the highest rated still news magazine type program on the air, and regularly wins its time slot. That's a big deal. And so the thing that kind of strikes me about this is Ellison proclaiming that he's not going to politicize the company, only for days later for us to now report that this deal to bring in Bari as a senior leader who will oversee editorial or to function in a sort of standards role, maybe some sort of ombudsman. It's kind of unclear what this is going to look like. With her and the Free Press being, an overtly, anti-woke, right-wing, right-leaning, sort of squishy right, just sort of depends on the day of the week website, it's hard for me to, I think, square this idea that we're not going to politicize the outlet, but at the same time, we're bringing in a website, a new outlet to be part of our kingdom here that has really sort of existed entirely as a different independent sort of political viewpoint than what you're seeing at the New York Times, the Journal, and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, the Free Press is a political website and it has a political point of view, and it tends to, broadly skew conservative. It's like a better dressed version of some of these other right-wing websites, to be frank. It has more of an independent streak, sure. It looks, I think most importantly, it looks very polished. It looks, it reads better, but it's a better dressed website than a lot of these right-wing websites, which you can dismiss as just totally junk. Bari Weiss is one of the most polarizing figures, I'd say, in media right now. And so when David Ellison was answering questions at these press conferences saying we don't want to politicize the company, and most importantly, we want to be a place where people on the left and the right can see as like a neutral entity and trust the information that comes out of it. This decision to pay Bari Weiss and to acquire the Free Press flies right in the face of that, right? It doesn't make any sense if you actually don't want to politicize the company. You don't go hiring one of the most polarizing political journalists of our time. Like, that's not something you do, right? And John, I also thought it's been notable. They've been talking very openly about how they want to be financially frugal and efficient and cut costs. And we know that there are going to be very painful layoffs at CBS News, as well as the entire Paramount. And they said if they don't have money for Stephen Colbert, right? Stephen Colbert gets cut and can't afford Stephen Colbert. But then they go spend an absurd amount of money on this conservative opinion site that's housed on Substack. How do you square those two? I mean, it just seems like everything David Ellison and his lieutenants have been saying is contradicted by this one of the first major moves that they're making. And, I've been talking to media executives over the last 24 hours about this, and no one can figure out any world in which, forget, even if you like Bari Weiss, no one can figure out any world in which the site, which is said to generate about $10 to $15 million in annual subscription revenue, we don't know what the overhead is, but how are they coming to an evaluation for this site north of $100 million, maybe $150 million? It doesn't make any sense. And so I think this decision actually looks really bad for Ellison because it lays bare that the things he's been telling the press aren't actually how he's going to govern the company. It's not going to be financially prudent if he supports it politically. And it's not going to be a place where he's politicizing the company by hiring a polarizing figure, right? Like it's not. I don't know how you can say this is not a political move. Not a good look for Ellison, I think, just a month in.
Yeah, I mean, it seems clear from a business perspective that this is not something that would be valued anywhere near $200 million, right? Just straight up. And at the same time, if Ellison and co at Paramount are stressing the need to cut costs, we're going to have to cut. We are hearing maybe down in November, there may be new layoffs coming to the company. But at the same time, we have to spend 9 figures to acquire this conservative, I would say contrarian is maybe the better way to describe it, opinion website and bring them in. Does that make any sense? If anything, it says to me that this is a politicized decision, right? And this comes on the backs of reporting Donald Trump repeatedly saying that he has this quiet handshake deal with David Ellison to get public service announcements for Trump-related MAGA, supporting campaigns on the airwaves of Paramount-owned properties. And we've seen some kind of quiet denials of that, but not entirely, right? Paramount and Ellison are not coming out and saying, no, this is not true. They're not coming out on the record and saying, no, that's not happening. And now at the same time, you see this flare go up into the air of like, oh, we're very close to now acquiring this conservative outlet that is also going to come in and have a say in the coverage and the tone of CBS and, therefore 60 Minutes, which Donald Trump sued for $2 billion because he didn't like the way that the program was edited with its interview with Kamala Harris. It's really hard, I think, to distance, these two decisions back to back.
Imagine too, John, how enraging it's going to be at CBS News hearing that you have to say goodbye to your longtime colleagues because CBS News has to be financially disciplined, knowing that the person who now runs or, gives editorial direction at CBS News, who has a lengthy history bashing your own outlet as well as other news organizations, I would say dishonestly, has been made a millionaire 100+ times over by David Ellison just this year. Like, how are they going to deliver that message? How is Jeff Shell going to actually write an email to them saying we need to be financially disciplined and make these tough decisions right after doing this? I mean, even if they were going to do this, you would think that they would at least have the wherewithal to do the cuts and then acquire the thing versus very openly, making this grand acquisition, and now you're going to have to 60 days later tell people that we can't afford to keep you on salary when you're making like $60,000. I don't know. It's going to be very difficult.
Well, especially because CBS journalists are actually delivering new reporting and information. If you go to the Free Press, which I have been reading, the top stories are another reason not to trust the quote unquote experts right now. And that is defending this idea that Israel is not committing genocide in Gaza, okay? How Zohran Mamdani could kill New York schools. That's an actual headline on the website. They really love to hate Mamdani. Free buses are a recipe for disaster because of Mamdani. Is there a dumber housing policy? These are the top stories. Is there a dumber housing policy than rent control? Where's the journalism in any of that? I actually didn't see a single reported piece. This is the top of the entire website. This is what David Ellison wants to spend $100 to $200 million on. These are conservative or contrarian takes on the news. That's great. The internet is filled with people with opinions. It's the beauty of the internet. It's what makes it fun to log on to social media websites. There's a mix of news and opinions. But paying $200 million for a Substack that houses contrarian opinions and very, very little, and I'm sure buried in here, there is some, reported piece. That's great. But if you're going to replace your CBS newsroom staff with conservative opinion guests, what does that say to both the company and also your audience at large. And for the audience, which continues to show up for 60 Minutes, which is, it takes a very smart, critical, and well-reported, very factual lens on the issues that it covers. What do you think the audience is going to do? How do you think the audience is going to respond when they find out and they are told that we're replacing some of the people behind the scenes at CBS News with these conservative and contrarian opinion writers? I mean,
right. Even if that's not what they're technically doing, right? That is what they are in practice doing.
Well, if they're going to lay off CBS News staff.
Yeah. So that's what they're doing. They're replacing CBS News staffers with Bari Weiss staffers. And it's remarkable. I mean, this site is so well funded and so well spoken about by some actually, very prominent journalists and media executives. Have they ever broken like a noteworthy story on this website? Like, what journalism exists there? I mean, it's very easy to just write takes on other people's journalism and to criticize how news organizations operate. And it's much different to actually have to deliver reporting. Reporting is tough and it's costly, it's time consuming, it's not easy. And they are just basically commenting on the news and often with very dishonest or ill-informed takes as well. Like, we haven't even really talked about that. But like, if you take the story, for instance, about the experts, why we shouldn't trust the experts. The idea is you shouldn't trust the experts because they're saying there's a genocide in Gaza. We know that there are like, how many tens of thousands of people who have died in Gaza, children included, and that there's a famine crisis because of Israel's blockade. They might have found a few things wrong with this body that's calling it a genocide. I'm sure no organization is perfect. I'm sure there are flaws in it. But that doesn't actually disprove the larger point that they're trying to make. And this is kind of the game that the free press and other outlets play. And, more broadly, John, I think that, what's the slogan on the website?
Honest, independent, fearless.
Yes. Honest, independent, fearless. Except they have been totally missing in action, for the most part, on the biggest story in American life today, which is the authoritarian creep coming from Donald Trump in the White House. They claim that they are truth tellers, that they actually don't, they're not a safe space, right? That they're a place where they disrupt the narratives. And yet, if you read the free press, you think the biggest threat to Western civilization is DEI, right? Like that's the take. That's what you would come away thinking. Not Donald Trump, sending armed National Guard members into cities. Not him destroying institutions and warping law enforcement like the FBI and the Department of Justice. Not a number of the things that he's done. I mean, we can't even go down the list. There's, I think, dozens of ways he's disfigured the U.S. government in his first 6 months in office. That's not the main story at the Free Press. The main story at the Free Press is DEI is really bad and it's destroying civilization. So the idea that she's some bold truth teller, she's missing on the biggest story of our time. And that should not go unsaid either. It's not only the fact that the stuff that they print is just often flawed and at times very dishonest. It's that they're not even addressing half the time the big elephant in the room, and that's because it would be politically inconvenient for her. By the way, if Biden were sending armed troops to cities, I would, and if masked federal agents were just like arresting people and tossing them into vans, I would bet the Free Press would be pretty outraged.
Well, we will see where this deal shakes out. It sounds like it's very close to happening. And so by the time you're even listening to this, the deal may already be done, but the result is the same. So we will see how this shakes out. I'm very curious how this is received by the CBS News staff, and how this is rolled out, how Ellison will portray this publicly, how this decision will be made, and whether or not the current head of CBS News will remain in place. There's going to be quite a bit of, I think, change ahead for everybody involved in this. All right. Well, when we come back, we're going to discuss the media's silence on Donald Trump's visible health issues.
Before I tell you about this opportunity, let me share why I chose Beehive for the Status newsletter. From the beginning, I wanted Status to feel distinct, not like it was stamped out of a template. Beehive has allowed us to build a completely custom experience, the design of the website, the way the newsletter looks in your inbox, and so much more. Most platforms force you into a cookie-cutter format, but Beehive gave us the creative control to match the polish of the reporting itself. That was the deciding factor for me, not just the technology, but the ability to truly own how our publication looks and feels. Since switching to Beehive, I've experienced firsthand why so many others have made the same choice. It's the difference between using a generic tool and using something purpose-built for serious media operations. Which brings me to why I'm excited to share this opportunity with fellow media operators who are ready to take their publications to the next level. If you're running a media business with over 100,000 subscribers, Beehive wants to offer you something valuable, a free growth consultation to explore how switching platforms could unlock your publication's next level of growth. It's not a sales call. It's a conversation with Beehive's team of veterans from top-tier media companies like The Information, Puck, Airmail, Morning Brew, and BuzzFeed to understand the unique challenges you're facing at scale, from subscriber retention and monetization to content distribution and audience segmentation. They'll work on ways to improve the success of your operation. If you're hitting the ceiling with your current platform or wondering how to optimize for the next 100,000 subscribers, this growth consultation could be exactly what you need. Visit beehive.com/status to book your call. That's Beehive, BEEHIV.com/status.
Welcome back. Oliver, this week there was quite a bit of online scrutiny and reaction to Donald Trump's health, which continues to become an increasingly important part of the conversation online about this president, his behavior, and what appears to be a literal physical cover-up of health issues that he is having. Recent photos and videos are continuing to show that the president has this bruising on his hand that has shown up repeatedly in recent weeks. The White House has explained this away as that he's taking aspirin and that is to prevent, some sort of future heart issues like strokes, keeps his blood thin, and then he's been shaking a lot of hands, and that combination has caused this bruising on his hand. I think for a lot of news outlets, they took that reporting, they reported on it, and mostly stopped asking questions, at least publicly. I did some reporting on this week, and I talked to Jonathan Reiner, the cardiologist, the George Washington University professor. He is the same cardiologist who treated Vice President Dick Cheney. That's important here because Dick Cheney, as we all know, suffered a heart attack while in office. It was pretty dramatic. Dr. Jonathan Reiner knows a thing or two. He's also a CNN contributor. I asked him his thoughts on whether or not the press is doing a good job covering this, especially after the last election with Joe Biden. So much of the focus was on Joe Biden's health. Older president, of course, 82 years old, but Donald Trump's not that much younger. He's 79, he's turning 80 in the next year. Dr. Reiner told me that he believes that the bruising explanation that the White House given is not a plausible one, and that he believes that the press needs to be doing more reporting on this issue. The president's health matters quite a bit to the American public. And in the past, Trump's health has been something that has been really unclear. We know from the beginning in 2015, in which Trump paid a doctor and effectively wrote his own note saying that he would be the healthiest president ever. And in recent months, when he had his last medical checkup, the White House doctor said that he had really no health issues to speak of at all and didn't mention that he was taking any sort of medication or that he had any sort of issues that have led to these photos of the bruised hands. And you may have also seen these really swollen ankles that he's got. Obviously, Trump does not want to go out into public and put this stuff on display, or to talk about the fact that he, being the strong man who defeated Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, has also these personal health issues of his own. And so we've instead seen makeup slathered on his hand, But there's not been a lot of reporting on this in the press. And I do think that is a little bit alarming, considering just the last election, so much emphasis was on that, but also journalists in the wake of it came out and said, look, we can't get too close to these subjects. We need to be holding power to account no matter what. And maybe we had a blind spot with Joe Biden and what the administration was telling us about his health. And maybe we took it too much at face value and that he did have larger issues. Oliver, what do you think about this whole topic?
I think it's baffling why it's not a bigger story. I mean, because it's I think with the thing with Joe Biden is it was much trickier to report because you're talking about someone's cognitive state. It's not visible on camera. Trump's health issues are visible on camera. Like the images of his hand have gone viral online many times, and yet you don't see the same sort of fire in the belly from the press questioning this White House about what is going on with Donald Trump's health. Like, we can see he's got bruised hands. We can see his swollen ankles. We can see when he's trying to hide his bruised hands by putting an absurd amount of makeup on them. And for some reason, just actually months after a huge reckoning, I'd say, in the press about not questioning the Biden White House enough, not being aggressive enough in pursuing that story, there's effectively silence or a blackout about Donald Trump's very visible, health problems. I mean, it's not normal for your hand to be bruised all the time. Like, that is strange. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but that is strange. And the doctors are saying it's, as you talk to Reiner, that the White House's explanation just does not add up. And so why are we not seeing this treated as a serious issue in the press? I think what we saw this past week was obviously pretty absurd. There was Trump is dead was trending on X, and people were convinced that for some reason he was dead, and that was absurd. And you saw the media counter that and say he's not dead, and Donald Trump bats down conspiracy theories about his health. But no, wait, like, there are some conspiracy theories, yes, like he is alive, but there's also a very real story there that deserves real scrutiny and real answers. And we're not getting that from the press or the White House. And it's frankly bizarre. Like, I just don't get it, because it's such an easy story to tell, given that there are images that show he's struggling or hiding some sort of health issue.
Yeah, Dr. Reiner actually made a very good point, too, in our conversation, which was, if the actual health issue that Donald Trump is facing involves shaking of hands, then what does his left hand look like? Have we seen bruising on that? And sure enough, we have. Donald Trump, both of his hands at times recently have shown these bruises on there. Now, again, not a doctor, nor am I a conspiracy theorist, nor do I pretend to know what it is that, he has here. But the idea that we're supposed to sort of turn away, supposed to take the White House's account here at face value when it doesn't necessarily add up. And a renowned cardiologist is saying, there's probably more to know here than what has been portrayed. I think says quite a bit. And so, I think it's hard to distance that between what just happened in the last White House, where Joe Biden's health was under such intense scrutiny. I asked Andrew Bates, he is the former deputy press secretary, his thoughts on how much scrutiny Biden's health came under versus Donald Trump's. And to be honest, he was pretty upset. He did not really he did not take the press's sort of silence on this issue very well. He said Trump even wants to steal the right to report things he doesn't want by revoking broadcast licenses, yet he's rewarded with a level of deference that results in him being treated like media executives' collective boss. They need to grow stronger backbones. 10 years late is better than never. So former Biden White House really not thrilled with the lack of coverage here that they feel like they unfairly had to endure in the final months of that candidacy. The Associated Press's David Bowder, he's also a media writer there. He wrote this week that the physical signs that have been pointed out online should trigger serious probes into the president's health. And I do think it's strange that we see prominent voices who people respect saying these things. and yet a real lack of coverage. And to me, it just makes me wonder if the press is worried about this administration, which has been has had no problem with being overtly vindictive, launching retribution against organizations, icing them out. The Associated Press was iced out of the White House for quite some time in its pool coverage because it just refused to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. That is like the silliest, most childish thing. And yet they're willing to do it. And it sort of raises the question, and I think a lot of suspicions among people online, and not necessarily the conspiracy theory crowd, of why aren't we seeing this reporting? And
well, especially too, John, because the whole half of the campaign, maybe more than half the campaign, the 2024 campaign was about Joe Biden's health. Like that's what Donald Trump made it about, right? It's sleepy Joe Biden, which is obviously a jab at his cognitive health. He doesn't have the stamina. It was about Joe Biden's health. And now that Donald Trump's health is very much in question and there are very, unanswered questions about it, it's suddenly not a story anymore. Like that doesn't make any sense. And Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about health anymore. I mean, imagine how frustrating it would be to be Joe Biden and have your health under the microscope the way it was. And then your opponent who beats you is, again, literally covering his hands up in makeup because they're bruised so badly. And the media kind of just collectively shrugs its shoulders like, whatever. It just doesn't, I actually don't understand, like, if you're a media executive, why are you not saying this is a story I want on every hour? Why is it being left? And I think here's a problem too, and you wrote about this in your piece, is when there's a void of information, conspiracy theories quickly fill that void. And so what you're seeing now is because, the Wall Street Journal and CNN and other major news organizations are not covering the story and being authoritative on it, you're seeing speculation swirl online, and you get trending hashtags like Trump is dead because the media is not covering it. And so it goes viral on TikTok with conspiracy theorists filling that void of information because people are hungry for that information, right? They want to know what's going on. And so then they turn to the people who are talking about it when it's not the mainstream press. And so I just really don't get how you can be a news executive and dismiss this. And then it's really, I thought, frustrating to see that the stories that were published this week about it were just basically shooting down the conspiracy theories like Donald Trump is alive. Yes, we know Donald Trump is alive, but like there is definitely a deeper story here. And why are we not seeing that? Where's Emma Tucker's Wall Street Journal doing? Can you imagine even if Joe Biden had bruised hands that people had spotted in private? People would report on that. Like in private, people have seen Joe Biden with bruised hands. Donald Trump's doing it in public.
Covered in makeup.
Right. It's in public. I mean, it writes itself to some extent. And there are medical professionals who are openly questioning what the White House is putting out. And Donald Trump does not have a good record on being transparent on anything, but particularly his health. So I don't know why it's not a story, why people aren't digging deeper, why we're not getting reporting from inside the White House, what aides are seeing. What is going on? Like, why don't we know? And why isn't this being treated as a major story is beyond me.
The Wall Street Journal ran a story about Biden's health being in question behind the scenes with on-the-record quotes from only Republicans.
Largely Republicans.
Was it largely?
Yeah. Kevin McCarthy was one of them, I believe.
He sure was.
Yeah.
Could you imagine now the Wall Street Journal running the same story about Donald Trump with on-the-record quotes from Democrats questioning his health? Where's that story? I mean, I've been an editor in a newsroom for nearly 2 decades.
It's almost like the press grades Donald Trump on a curve.
You could write that story tomorrow. We could call up a few Democrats. It's not even difficult. There's an intentional decision not to do that.
Where is Sanjay Gupta? That's what I want to know. Is Sanjay Gupta going to go on air and talk about Donald Trump's health? Where is the segment on that? Why isn't he in the White House? Actually, CNN has sent Sanjay Gupta, not to pick on CNN, but they have sent Sanjay Gupta to the White House briefings before to ask questions about when a president's health or something like that is in question. Why isn't Sanjay Gupta in the White House asking questions? So when Caroline Leavitt says, oh, he's taking baby aspirin and shaking a lot of hands, Sanjay can be like, actually, that doesn't really add up. And I'm a world-class doctor. Free idea. Send Sanjay to the White House to get some answers.
They could certainly do it. And I think one of the things I was thinking about with the reaction online to this idea last week, that this conspiracy theory that was really baseless, but floated because we hadn't seen Donald Trump in public for a few days, therefore he must be dead. Trump is dead was trending. But it reminds me of the Free Press a little bit with their top story. Another reason not to trust the experts. The opening line. One of the great lessons of the past decade is that when you read a variation of experts say in a headline, you ought to think twice and for yourself. What that has continually told the audience from conservative media is that you can't trust people in authority. You cannot trust experts, doctors, medical people, especially all of those experts and authorities that were involved with COVID. They were liars. They weren't telling the truth. They were poisoning us secretly behind the scenes. Florida this week is announcing that they're going to end vaccine mandates altogether. Why? Because you can't trust the experts. And this is what's going to happen with our information ecosystem online when you can't trust anybody. And that is something that has been preached to the right for decades now, since Rush Limbaugh era. You can't trust those people in authority. You can only you have to sort of, figure these things out each time. Don't listen to them. Listen to me. Listen to Sean Hannity. He knows what's really going on. And I think what you're seeing is a reaction to that, in that people go, I can't trust any of that. Why should I trust any of that? And then when the mainstream press, whose sole job it is to deliver facts and to hold power to account and to scrutinize them, is silence on these major issues, all that does is just create a vacuum for conspiracy theorists. And it's hard for me to see how we're going to that status is going to change over time, how that's going to improve when there are obvious stories to be written about this. Even working in newsrooms, you have people whose sole jobs are like SEO. Okay, guys, the top trending item is like the top 5 trends are Donald Trump is dead in some capacity. Where were the stories about that, actually? Right. Here's the ground truth of what they've been saying and why our medical experts, the people that we're reaching out to and talking about this specifically, have their own thoughts on it. Raise their own questions.
On the destruction of truth, John, just because I've been watching Andor lately, there is this but the whole thing, if you haven't seen it, it's a study on authoritarianism, it's a study on power, and it's a study most profoundly, perhaps, on the power of propaganda. And there's this incredible speech.
This is the Disney Plus Star Wars spinoff show, Andor.
I cannot believe this is
for the
even
uninitiated out there.
Yeah, there's so many parallels to what we're seeing in America right now. But there's this incredible speech, and I just want to read part of it to you because I think this is actually what you were getting at. And it says, the senator, of all the things at risk, the loss of an objective reality is perhaps the most dangerous. The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil. When truth leaves us, when we let it slip away, when it is ripped from our hands, we become vulnerable to the appetite of whatever monster screams the loudest. And then she goes on to say the monster screaming the loudest is Emperor Palpatine. But that is, you read that and you hear that speech, and it is so reminiscent of what we're seeing today. And that's what they aim to do. They aim to destroy the truth. And then who wins when the truth is destroyed? The person that screams the loudest. In this case, it tends to often be Donald Trump.
All right, well, we will see how this goes. We will see if the press decides to do a little bit more reporting. Oftentimes, there are investigations and reporting happening behind the scenes. They don't happen immediately. These things take time. And so, I think we should leave open the possibility that there is some good reporting that's in the works in these newsrooms and that people are genuinely working hard to solve these questions, because I can only imagine that even within newsrooms, people are asking these questions like, I don't know, this bruising thing with makeup, this seems a little bit of a stretch. Should we really take them at their word here? They're not always honest. Are they ever honest? I suspect that we will continue to see some reporting on this in the future, but anyways, okay, when we come back, we're going to discuss cable kingpin John Malone's criticism of CNN as anti-Trump. Welcome back. So, Oliver, this week, John Malone, he is the cable kingpin who has run Liberty Media. He's a major shareholder in Warner Brothers Discovery, David Zaslav, the current chief executive of Warner Brothers Discovery, is his protege. He's a very well-known industry figure and also a very powerful person behind the scenes, not somebody you ever see really in front of the camera. Has granted some pretty illuminating and rare interviews this week as he has a new book coming out. He spoke to the New York Times and gave some pretty eye-opening responses to his views of CNN. And John Malone goes way back with guys like Ted Turner, the visionary founder of the Turner Networks and CNN itself, right? As a pioneer of cable news online, Malone gave a pretty, I think, tough assessment, sort of questionable, about how he views CNN. He says that CNN is now a shadow of what its founder had envisioned, that being Ted Turner. He says some of the best journalists in America do still work there, but they, quote, express their opinions too much in their news. And he says that the network still does not do, quote, actual journalism, and accuse it of being an anti-Trump news service. You and I both are former CNN journalists, having worked in the media coverage there, as well as other places. That sort of took me by surprise, because I don't think that at least my view of watching CNN right now, I do not get that this is a network filled with too much journalists expressing their opinions, nor do I see it as a anti-Trump news service. You did some reporting on this week, speaking to folks in and around this situation at CNN and Warner Brothers Discovery. What are you hearing about it?
Well, I mean, obviously they're not happy to be insulted. But I think it's particularly notable, John. So we think about John Malone. So before Warner Brothers Discovery acquired the Warner Media assets, and before it actually became Warner Brothers Discovery, John Malone went on CNBC. And he accused CNN of basically not being a journalism outfit anymore, and said he wanted them to hire some real journalists on there. And it was a real red flag at the time for the people running CNN. And it was still run by Jeff Zucker, and it was still very aggressively countering Donald Trump's lies. And that was obviously notable. But since David Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery have been operating CNN, they've made a number of changes to tone down CNN, right? They've gotten rid of the Don Lemons, the Jim Acostas. They're no longer there. The John Harwoods, they're gone, right? They have installed people like Scott Jennings across the programming. So you're always going to hear some MAGA take, no matter how dishonest it is, no matter how untethered from reality it is, they're going to be sitting on those panels. And just broadly, those punchy chyrons that you used to see on air that said like Donald Trump was lying, just calling him out flatly, those are all gone, right? Like the network is not covering Donald Trump the way it did 5 to 6 years ago. And I thought it was really revealing that despite all of those changes, despite everything they have done to bend over backward for Donald Trump and for the MAGA movement, that John Malone still goes out there on television, still goes out there to the New York Times and dismisses it as an anti-Trump network. And I thought, wow, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, he is the avatar for MAGA. You will never win these people over. There is nothing CNN can do short of installing Sean Hannity type personalities on the air 24/7 that is going to convince someone like John Malone that it's not an anti-Trump network. That's just where he is. It's never going to happen. And so what CNN really has done, as they've tried to court these conservatives to come over to the network, trust us, we have Scott Jennings on, we got rid of Jim Acosta, Don Lemon doesn't work here anymore, we've toned down, we're fair now. They don't view them as fair. They have not really won over conservatives in a real way. Fox News is where they turn left and right. They have just chased away the core audience that actually used to like CNN, because it used to be in their eyes, the truth tellers, the people who did not bow to power, the people who aggressively questioned the lies coming out of the White House. And I think that's a real lesson, especially as David Ellison tries to go down that same path, which is there is no world in which the MAGA crowd is going to trust a news outlet that is centered in the truth, or that's a truth-telling network, because the facts are at odds with this White House. So if you're a fact-based network, you're going to be contradicting this White House, which is going to mean that Donald Trump and his fans are not going to like you. And no matter how much you soften the coverage to try to appeal to this base, it's not going to happen. These people celebrate when the Jim Acostas are thrown overboard, but they don't turn to your channel. They celebrate by watching Sean Hannity take really cheap shots at the network over on Fox News. That's how they celebrate.
Yeah, the thing I found surprising about this as well is his comparisons to Fox News. How in John Malone's view, Fox is the one that's doing proper journalism, whereas CNN is an outlet that is filled with anti-Trump voices. He says that journalists tend to be progressives personally, and it's impossible to separate that sort of personal opinion structure from the way they cover the news. And I found that really interesting and illuminating on his perspective there, because in his mind, Fox is delivering the news straight, but somehow they are not running into this problem of separating their personal opinion structure from the way they cover the news.
Which is so absurd, by the way. It's so absurd. If you watch Fox News, the straight news coverage is totally immersed in opinion. It's all coming from a place that is friendly to Donald Trump. Harris Faulkner, who is like supposed to be, I think, an anchor there.
She's supposed to be an anchor.
She's supposed to be an anchor, yeah. I mean, it's laughable. She's like totally in the tank for Donald Trump. The way they treat him, the way they cover him, the way they express their own opinions about policy. I mean, it's baked in to the equation over at Fox News. And John Malone, I guess, thinks that's okay because they're friendly to the guy who he probably supports for president. But CNN, which is far more down the middle, far more straight, does actual journalism and reporting, is an anti-Trump mouthpiece. Like, I think it also, John, though, it is like, to some extent, it's not wrong to say that a fact-based news organization would be inherently, by default, anti-Trump, because a fact-based news organization would be pro-truth. And if you are pro-truth, you are against those who are lying. And who is lying? Well, Donald Trump is lying, and his White House is lying, and they're lying all the time. Basically, every time they open their mouths, they're telling some sort of lie or distorting the facts and reality to either seize power or to, do whatever. And so, yes, like if you are a pro-truth news organization, you are anti-Trump, right? You're not pro-Trump. So I understand that, but that's I think the wrong way to look at it. The right way to look at it is this is a pro-truth, pro-facts news organization.
It's a lot more difficult to work in a newsroom and have to separate fact from fiction. If you have political figures that want to come out and regularly say things that are untrue or mislead people, it is very easy to hand them the microphone and to just run with what they say, unquestioned. That is the easiest thing in the world. You can just quote directly from it. There you have it, folks. All right, moving on to the next thing. That's so easy. That's not the journalism part, though. That's just basically being state television. And so the hard part is doing the part that, and this isn't to defend CNN, this isn't anything like that for any of these networks, but the hard part is to actually do the fact checking. It's to actually do the journalism part. If we're going to say that Washington, D.C. needs a federal takeover with military troops on the streets because it's so dangerous, are we going to fact check that, or are we just going to run with it? Sure, we could support it like Fox is regularly doing. Oh my goodness. The Doge employee Big Balls got hurt there. He got beat up by a couple of teenagers, one of whom is a girl, which in MAGA world must be highly embarrassing, by the way. But at the same time, the work is done when you're actually taking a look at these facts, taking a look at the fact that red states, for example, in America, Memphis, Tennessee, is a very dangerous city by violent crime standards. And it's very easy to just run with what they say. And it sounds like in John Malone's view that a unfiltered, speech from politicians in which facts and people are not held to account is sort of his view of what we should be consuming, and people can just figure it out on their own. But I think that actually it forgets the whole journalism part, frankly.
I think that John Malone, if AOC were giving a speech on tax policy, I think he'd want it fact checked afterward. You think you just want to air AOC or Mamdani talking about like the schools? I think he'd want Zoran fact checked. I think he doesn't like when his own people are fact checked, is what I think. I think also, I was talking to CNN staffers about this, and I want to read to you what one of them told me, because it kind of lays bare the predicament here, which is if you are pro-truth, you are sort of in this camp that's going to be contradicting Donald Trump. The person told me this. They said, CNN is not anti-Trump. We report the facts, whether it is good or bad for Trump. For example, when CNN criticizes RFK Jr. for promoting dangerous conspiracy theories, that's not anti-Trump. That's reporting the facts to our audience. Sometimes there are not two sides to a story. RFK's junk science on autism is the perfect example. If Malone is going to criticize CNN for being anti-Trump, what does he think we should present RFK's views on autism as rooted in sound science? Should we give both sides to RFK's conspiracy theories, even though there's only one side, in the name of being fair and balanced? I think that really actually that's the point that I'm making here, and that, it is a tough predicament. If you are reporting the facts, you are going to be contradicting this administration. And I got to say, John, I'm a little bit disappointed by the people interviewing John Malone, letting him spout off this nonsense without being challenged at all. Like, where are the follow-up questions to him about, like, wait a second, here's a scenario. What do you think? How should CNN report on this? Mr. Malone, you are praising Fox News. Have you read those Dominion documents where the top executives and the owner, Rupert Murdoch, knew that the network was pushing dangerous lies about something as foundational to American democracy as the presidential election? Are you okay with that? Do you think that's the network that CNN should aspire to be? Again, he was on CNBC for a while for a live interview. It was unscripted. Why wasn't he not getting those questions? I don't really get it.
Yeah. I did hear this morning.
Being a billionaire should not be a license to just say bullshit 24/7 and just not be unchallenged. Like, that's not the way this should work. Like, you go on CNBC, you should be challenged regardless of how much money you have. And it was bizarre to see, especially when you're saying something so untethered from, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. I did hear this morning that our friend Kara Swisher was interviewing John Malone. And I will say that I only heard, maybe half of the interview so far, but she definitely was holding him, asking some tougher follow-up questions that I think were quite revealing in terms of maybe how to conduct these sorts of interviews. But to me, all of this says, along with the other things that we've talked about today, that we have a crisis when it comes to trust in the press, to trust in information, whether it's Donald Trump's health, whether or not it's, things that RFK are saying, whether or not you can trust what's going to be coming out of CBS News with Bari Weiss's, free press apparently coming in and joining the fold. I think that Americans in particular are in this moment where they have a crisis of trust. Who do I trust? Do I believe that I'm going to get, accurate and fake and factual information from these outlets? Or am I going to go off, frankly, into the wilderness online and try to find, those who I might be able to trust, those who, maybe. And it feels like a lot of people are doing that right now on platforms like X, where they are hanging out on these platforms and using them as a way to just sort of like weed through a bit of, the sort of muck out there. And John Malone is frankly saying here that, if you fact check Donald Trump, that's injecting your personal opinion. And I think that actually speaks volume about how people want to consume information these days.
Yeah.
All right. Oliver, do you have any plans for this weekend?
Well, we finished watching Andor, so we need a new series to binge. So we'll probably be on the lookout for that. Maybe there's a nice park day in there. Actually, you know what, John? I will be attending. Elise and I are going to the MTV Music Awards, the VMAs, Video Music
Oh,
Awards on
amazing.
Sunday evening. So that should be interesting.
Who's performing?
Lady Gaga is going to be there. A number of people are performing. Usually there's a pretty good guest list of artists. So that'll be exciting. We'll
the
see that.
VMAs
It's on
are
Sunday
iconic
evening this year. It's on CBS. So this is actually another Paramount thing, but it is going to be on CBS, I believe, this year. So and after football, if I'm not mistaken. So it'll be very interesting to see what the ratings look like for the VMAs, which have been they've kind of fallen from like the, you remember with the VMAs back in the day were a really big thing. People used to watch it. Wasn't the big Kanye West Taylor Swift moment at the VMAs? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of fallen off. Like no one really talks about the VMAs anymore. So I'm curious if it's on CBS after football, it's going to register with a lot of people, and we'll see how big the show is. I'll be there.
I can't wait. We'll be looking for you in the crowd. All right, well, that's it for us this week. Thank you, Oliver, for another great one. I will catch you next time. Thank you for listening to Powerlines, a presentation of Status, and a special thank you to Beehive for sponsoring this episode. The show is produced by Matt Havia and Antonio Enriquez in association with In the Arena Studios. Please like, share, and subscribe to Powerlines on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen, and watch full episodes and clips on our YouTube page at Status.